The Enter Bills function can be found under the Vendor drop-down menu or one of the icons representing this function. Once selected, this is the window that appears and graphically looks very similar to the Write Bills screen. But there is a major difference. When you enter a bill, the accounts payable balance for the vendor you select gets updated. In other words, a liability gets created automatically in this screen after entering a transaction, whereas in the Write Checks function, you select a bank account and the cash balance is reduced. Always remember, there is never a connection between Enter Bills and Write Checks. Doing one does not affect the other. Accordingly, once the accounts payable liability is created through Enter Bills, it can only be relieved through Pay Bills, which we cover in the next session. Again, it is important to understand writing a check in the banking function never relieves an accounts payable. Many users have made the mistake of thinking they are recording the payment of an accounts payable by using the Write Checks function, and what happens is when you mistakenly use the Write Checks function to record payment of a bill that has already been set up in Enter Bills, the accounts payable liability is never relieved because the act of recording a Write Checks in QuickBooks is a separate transaction that simply relieves your cash account, and your accounts payable just stays open until someone finally realizes what has happened. So, please avoid this mistake, and it will save you the agony of fixing it down the road. Now, getting back to recording and Enter Bills, please note on the top of the window is a taskbar allowing you to perform various tasks such as going back or forward to previous bills entered, creating a new bill, saving, deleting, copying, memorizing, printing, or attaching a file to the transaction you are in. And there are also other functions available to perform that we will discuss later. The body of the bill screen allows you to put in the vendor, customer, employee, or other name that you are recording this bill for. Once you populate the vendor field, the entity's address information is automatically populated in the address section. You can then change the date and put in the bill number as well as verify the bill due date is correct, which will be based on the terms you associate with your vendor at the time you set them up, or if no terms were entered in the vendor setup, then the default terms would kick in that were set up in the bill's preferences covered in Lesson 3. A class can also be assigned to the transaction and a memo put in on the top section as well. If you are not sure what a class is, please review in Lesson 4 under the Class List session. Regarding dates, it is very important to make sure you put in the correct date since QuickBooks is a singularly date-driven program that only knows what you tell it in terms of what period of time a transaction relates to. Putting in the wrong date can distort your financial results from period to period, which defeats the purpose of having accurate accounting records. So when you look at a bill or expenditure transaction, you need to not only ask, what does this relate to, so that you use the proper accounts or account for the transaction, but you must also determine what period or periods of time does this transaction relate to. If a transaction relates to more than one period, you may have to record the transaction one way and Enter Bills, and then use journal entries to allocate the transaction to multiple periods. We cover using journal entries in a later lesson. The bottom portion of the Bills window allows you to record the expenditure under either Expenses tab or the Items tab, or both. The difference between these tabs is that the Expenses tab allows you to select the account or accounts from the chart of accounts list you want to utilize in recording your bill expenditure, and the Items tab allows you to select from the item list the item or items the bill expenditure relates to. In some cases, the bill expenditure may require using both tabs to properly record the transaction. Notice the different columns of information available in each of the tabs and how they are different. In the Expenses tab, you select the account and put in a memo. But in the Items tab, once you select an item, then the description, quantity, unit of measure, cost, and amount is automatically populated, depending on how the item was set up. Also, the accounting is determined based on which account was selected when the item was set up. Item creation, including settings, is covered in Lesson 4. Similarities between the two tabs include the ability to associate the bill expenditure with a customer job, as well as determining whether you want to make the expenditure billable to the customer job referenced. Lastly, you can select a class to associate the expenditure with. Keep in mind that QuickBooks allows you to split and bill expenditures into as many line items that are needed in the tabs provided to properly record the transaction. On the Bills window taskbar, you can select an open PO that the bill expenditure relates, and or if the bill expenditure relates to paying someone time that has been previously recorded, this is another option. If you want to clear any splits created in the transaction, you can select this as well. And lastly, if you make changes to the amounts in the expenses and or items tabs, then you can select the recalculate button. Once completed, you can click on the Save and Close or Save and New button to record the bill. If you have a credit to record, this procedure is the same as outlined above, except you select in the upper left-hand corner of the upper window the credit option. A credit will have the opposite financial impact of entering a bill, and when applied against an existing bill will reduce what you need to pay. We cover applying credits in the next session involving paying bills.